Hello and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I'm your host Deepak. It is my great pleasure to welcome Professor Tamar Mitts, Assistant Professor of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University, and a valued member of the Data Science Institute and the Saltzman Institute of War and Peace Studies as our esteemed guest on today's episode. Her research explores pressing questions at the nexus of technology, conflict, and political behavior. Professor Mitts investigates how digital platforms influence political violence, extremism, and public opinion, with particular focus on the role of social media during conflict, the strategies of violent and non-violent movements online, and the manipulation of media to sway public sentiment. Her work combines innovative data collection methods with rigorous empirical designs, leveraging insights from digital media to illuminate the dynamics of modern political conflict. Professor Tamar's research has been published in top academic journals such as American Political Science Review, International Organization, Journal of Politics, Perspective on Politics, and Journal of Economic Perspectives. It has been also featured in major media outlets including the Washington Post, Boston Globe, Fortune, Vox, War on the Rocks, and Foreign Policy. Professor Mitts earned her BA in Politics from New York University and her MA, MPhil, and PhD in Political Science from Columbia University. In this episode, Professor Tamar Mitts will share valuable insights from her latest book, Safe Havens for Hate, The Challenge of Moderating Online Extremism. Kicking off this exciting conversation, let's warmly welcome Professor Tamar Mitts to the show. It's a real privilege to welcome you, Professor Tamar Mitts. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Professor Tamar, you argue that content moderation is a policy problem, not just a platform problem. Can you elaborate on what this distinction means and why it's critical in today's fight against online extremism?
Yeah, for sure. So thanks again for this great question. And actually, this is one of the questions that really motivated this project more generally. So when I say that we need to think about content moderation as a policy problem, I allude to this idea that this is a problem that is broader than any individual actor, platform, or space. And just like we think about issues like pollution, that, it's not a responsibility of just one factory, but we actually need to have a systemic solution. This is kind of what I mean when I talk about this issue for content moderation. And as I show in the book, basically, I tell the story of why this is the case, why we need to think about the problem of hate online as something that is broader than what the Facebooks or the X's or the TikToks of the world need to deal with, but it's something that we need to think about more broadly. And the short answer, and I'm happy to give a longer one too, is that those who propagate hate, those actors that use these platforms to coordinate the dissemination of hateful content on its many dimensions, coordinate across platforms strategically. So as a result, our responses have to match those efforts. And there's currently some sort of mismatch between the way we think about content moderation, which is kind of letting each platform do its own policies and enforcement, to thinking about this more as something that we need to actually think more broadly about.
Your research draws on original data from over 100 militant and hate organizations. What methodological challenges did you face in gathering and analyzing such sensitive and dispersed data across platforms?
Yeah, so that was definitely a challenge, and it took several months to collect, if not even more than that. There were multiple levels of using this sort of data. The first is that we didn't want to select kind of when deciding which groups to collect data on, we didn't want to select only those that we know for sure using social media, like the Islamic State, for example, was very well known in its use of social media. So what we did was to actually go to established lists of militant and hate groups that were just compiled by other academic organizations. And then group by group, we went and just tried to find any evidence we can on many different platforms for their both official presence, so like official channel of so-and-so, as well as many unofficial channels by which they channels by which they used to disseminate their content. So that took some time to do. It was actually a team of research assistants and I that we used this together. And that created a really, really interesting and quite unique data source to give us descriptive evidence on who is using what platform. And that actually ended up telling a pretty interesting story later in the book about which platforms these groups then use. I would add, though, that for some of these groups, we also went ahead and collected a lot more data on the specific propaganda and content that they posted on different platforms, which allowed us then to kind of dig one level deeper into the specific messaging strategies. So if you like data, if you like analyzing data, this is a fun project. If you don't, that might be a little hard, but I really enjoyed the data collection for this project. It was really fascinating.
Very insightful. Professor, one striking point in your book is how differing moderation standards create safe havens across platforms. Could you share a specific example where such a haven significantly benefited an extremist group?
Yeah, definitely. So the book goes through different examples. I'll give you maybe one, the most prominent one, because that particular platform has become a real hub. So I'm sure you've heard of Telegram. Telegram is a well-known platform that is used for a lot of great purposes. But one of the particular interest for the book, one of the unique attributes of this platform is that it tends to have a quite large user base. So compared to other platforms that might be more fringe, it actually attracts quite a bit of audience, but it tends to be very, very lenient in its policies. So one of the stories in the book is the way I track how different platforms police hateful content. Some are more restrictive, some are more lenient, and Telegram is on the more lenient side of things, but at the same time is very large, and especially in 2015, Telegram opened its channels feature. Today, it's very common. There's many Telegram channels that produce, like one actor can produce and disseminate to many, many people. And that actually made the platform even more attractive to a lot of organizations because they could find a hub to produce content, disseminate it widely, and then not be banned and not be deplatformed. And what you see subsequently is many groups that are facing restrictions on bigger sites, like what used to be Twitter at the time and Facebook, kind of used to be the prime locations for these actors. When they got banned from there, you see this search around for different platforms to migrate to, and many end up on Telegram. And that's partly, as I argue in the book, because Telegram allows both for content authenticity, so the ability to post kind of freely, but also relatively wide reach, audience reach. And these two dimensions matter a lot for the choice of platform.
In examining movements like ISIS, the Proud Boys, and QAnon, what common patterns of platform migration and adaptation did you observe when these groups were banned or restricted?
Yeah, so I kind of maybe started answering this question a little bit before this question, but yeah, so one thing, we see a lot of actors moving to Telegram for the reasons I just mentioned. But one of the additional thing to say on this is that QAnon and the Proud Boys and the Islamic State and the Taliban, like all these actors that have been banned on social media, they are very different actors. Like you wouldn't expect these to actually move or behave the same. And one of the most striking things I found in this research is that they actually behave very, very the same, like in terms of the tactics of adaptation. And I argue that this is actually not a mistake. This is just, and again, if your goal is to disseminate a message to the widest audience possible, you will kind of converge on the same tactics to get there. So in addition to migrating to the platforms that kind of offer the best mix of audience reach and what I call authenticity, we also see similar adaptations on the messaging campaigns. So for example, one thing that was common both, for example, in the QAnon example or the Taliban example or the Islamic State example, as well as other groups, is that they engage in a strategic kind of toning down the messages. So they would find how to kind of make the point they want to make without kind of identifying as themselves so that they don't get banned, or by telling a message that is close enough that would attract audiences to become interested more in what they're saying, which then they could outlink to another space where they could be more free. So those kind of adaptation tactics that are very aware of the moderation space and the different policies of different platforms is something that is very consistent across different groups with very, very different ideologies. And I think that was actually quite surprising and interesting finding as I was doing this research.
Professor, what role do smaller or lesser known platforms play in the ecosystems of online extremism, especially after major platforms enforce takedowns or bans?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, because if you were to ask a lot of government actors who regulate social media or design these regulations, they would tell you the smaller platforms don't matter. They have no one goes there. We don't care what's going on there. They're low value for us. And the common thinking around small platforms, that kind of around the time I was writing the book, is that they're kind of inconsequential. They really, we shouldn't care about them. But what I show in the book is actually that they matter a lot. It is true that these actors that I study in the book don't really want to be on the small platforms. They would rather be on the larger platforms. But the small platforms allow to do other things that the bigger platforms don't allow when they become more restrictive. So one is design campaigns that can then filter back into the larger platforms, like I just mentioned. But there's another thing that they oftentimes would do on the smaller spaces, which is recruitment. So because the smaller platforms tend to be more lenient, and actually explain in the book why the smaller platforms are more lenient in their policies as opposed to the bigger ones. But those spaces allow for fostering deeper connections with interested audiences, and sometimes even recruitment for actual actions in the real world. So I think that is to say that even though the smaller platforms are less consequential in the sense that they reach less of an audience, they have other functions that they play in this story that we shouldn't ignore.
How have extremist groups leveraged the inconsistencies in global content moderation policies to expand their reach or rebrand themselves?
Yes, thank you. Yeah. So this is really the core story of the book. The book begins with this idea that we have inconsistent moderation policies, but then makes the following argument, which is backed by empirical finding, that these inconsistencies are not random. So it's not like some platforms moderate more, other platforms moderate less, and it's kind of like a mess, which some people actually think. It's actually more systematic, and the way this inconsistency tends to look like is that because of the pressure, so look like the following: the larger the platforms, the more restrictive they are in their policies towards hateful content. The smaller the platforms in terms of user base, the less restrictive they are. And that structure actually emerges from the strategic interaction between governments, tech companies, and kind of how they are thinking about what to do with online hate. So in the book, I go through the history, the more recent history around government regulation of social media companies, showing that when governments are kind of thinking about, okay, we need to restrict harmful content. We don't necessarily want to do this. I'm talking here about democratic governments that oftentimes would value free speech and whatnot. They actually think that you need to do something about online hate, and therefore we need to regulate. When they make those choices, they tend to regulate the larger platforms and kind of let the little platforms, the small platforms, kind of leeway. What I show is that this particular strategic interactions with the platforms results in these inconsistencies that have that particular structure. And that then results in the way hateful actors adapt. So it's like a circle. We have hateful content, we have reactions from government and tech companies, and the way they form their solutions feeds back to the tactics of these organizations. So the book really tells the story on both sides of how we end up where we are. And the kind of bottom line is that we need to think about this as a system, kind of going back to where we started, that it's not just like what one platform does and what another platform does. It's really how they work together and how this is basically an ecosystem. And that's how we should think about it.
What can government do differently to tackle online extremism without crossing the fine line into over censorship or infringing on civil liberties?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest questions I struggled with the book, because on one hand, I document a problem that governments want to solve. The solution tends to be some sort of regulation to ask platforms to do more. In the book, I make the case that when we think about the solution, we need to think about it as an ecosystem, kind of not just, finding Facebook or finding Google or finding whatever, but we need to think, kind of encourage collaboration. However, and that's the big however, the exact same solution could be very easily misused by actors who want to censor speech that, most of the public would think of as not harmful. So there's a fine line really between the idea of what is harmful content, what is illegal speech, what is the kind of content that we think of risk to society that we want to limit, and what is the kind of speech that, even though it might be offensive or might not everybody would like or agree with it, is still completely fine. And I think that the fine line between the two scenarios is very fine, and we need to be really careful if we come up with a global solution that would address this problem systematically, like I kind of advocate for. We need to have very clear safeguards so that it doesn't get misused to kind of going into this direction of censorship and not allowing people to express their opinions, because we do want people to be expressing their opinions freely, and we don't want to go into censorship state or anything like that. That's not what the book is advocating for. So to a long answer to your question is really that as we understand that this is how the nature of the problem is and what's the best strategy to address it, at the same time, we need to be very careful not to design policies or tools or mechanisms that would essentially shut down people's voices, in unnecessarily or not the way that we actually intend to.
You stress the importance of considering the information environment as a whole. How might a cross-platform strategy for moderation look in practice? Are there any models or initiatives that come close?
Yes. So moving from the policy to the practice, this is actually a really hard practical challenge as well. And there's some discussion I offer in the book for this. But I would say that the hardest tactical challenge to actually, let's say we all agree we need to have a systemic solution. We want to give resources to platforms to work together and collaborate. Then how do you do this? So there have been initiatives, mostly tech initiatives in the tech company space to do this. So one example is in the whole space of child sexual abuse material that is also illegal. There's been a lot of collaboration on creating databases of content that is should be removed, and then kind of letting everybody know this particular piece of content has been disseminated, take it down. Pretty robust mechanisms that kind of give us direction as to how to think about doing this in practice. Modeled on that, around 8 years ago, some tech companies have come together to create a body called the GIFCT, or the Global Internet Forum to Counterterrorism. And that particular initiative had a similar model. So they started a big database where, and the focus was really the Islamic State, because the group was so active on social media at the time. And they started archiving propaganda materials that the Islamic State was disseminating. And once something was uploaded to one platform, other platforms could identify it and take it down. That initiative has struggled over the years with funding and other things. But today we have emerging startups that are kind of modeled along the same idea, which is to provide practical tools to companies, whether they're large or small, to build tools to do exactly that, and easily. Because essentially the practical challenge that we've seen, especially smaller companies face, is just resources. content moderation is expensive. You need engineers, you need smart people to go and actually develop these systems. So one of the practical ideas to do this and help more companies do this is to just offer open source tools to do that. So that's the most recent iteration of this idea that I have seen that I think is promising. And the fact that it's open source, it also allows people to look into this technology and understand exactly what it's doing, and also critique it if needed. But yeah, I think this is definitely a practical challenge as much as a policy challenge.
Professor Tamar, given your findings, do you believe current AI-driven moderation tools are equipped to handle the nuance and context required in identifying extremist content?
Yeah, really good question. So automation, even before LLMs, large language models, has always been part of content moderation because we're talking about a problem that is just very large scale. We are not talking about like 10 posts a day. We're talking about billions and millions of posts. So AI systems have been in use right from the beginning in the form of classifiers. So companies would develop based on training data, tools to kind of automatically identify that sort of content. But as you can imagine, those classifiers are imperfect, and oftentimes they would either miss important content or censor content that shouldn't be censored. And as a result, as a result of these mistakes, in fact, the recent rollback of Meta of its content moderation systems actually pointed to those misclassifications of its automated systems as reasons to kind of cut back on this to prevent over censorship. I think you may be pointing to a new development, which is like LLMs and their ability, much more powerful abilities to analyze text and content based on transformer technologies. And I think it's still an open question as to whether these systems are better than what we've used before. I have many students that I teach that work on projects that kind of try to tackle what kind of the extent to which LLMs are better than previous automated classifiers, machine learning classifiers. And I think it's a mix. So sometimes you see really much better performance, and you can imagine how this could be scaled up to identify harmful content and take it down. But as of now, I must say that I don't think it's significantly better than what we've had before. And the need for human review is always important, and it's not going away, at least for now, as I can tell. But yeah, I think it's an open question.
Professor, my last question. Finally, what message would you give to policymakers and tech leaders who still see content moderation as merely a tech or algorithmic challenge rather than a broader governance issue?
Yeah, so these are the kind of people I'm trying to reach with the book too. I think that one point I will make is that when we think about solutions to problems, we always have an idea in our mind of what the problem is. We may know the idea, like the problem really well, or we may have an idea about what the problem is. But I think that in order to find real solutions to problems that we want to find solutions to, we really need to study the problem. And in the book, what I do is to study one problem. And what I find is that the way we think about solutions just completely mismatches the problem. So I think that it's true that the toolings and the responsibility is on the platforms. I'm not letting them go. I think they are definitely part of the actors that matter here a lot. But the way we approach it is not just like, let's develop an algorithm to fix the problem, because it's not just a problem of a given platform. It is a broader problem. And I think that this is an insight that we need to bring into our decision making when we think about the solutions to the problem of online hate more generally.
Thank you, Professor Tamar Mitts, for sharing your deep insights and groundbreaking research with us today. Your work not only helps us better understand the complex dynamics of online extremism, but also challenges us to rethink how we approach content moderation in a fragmented digital landscape. Safe Havens for Hate is a timely and vital contribution to the conversation on how harmful actors exploit our digital platforms and how we as a policymakers, technologists, and informed citizens can respond more effectively. Your ability to bridge data science, political behavior, and real-world implications is both inspiring and necessary in today's interconnected world. Thank you once again, Professor Tamar Mitts, for joining us today and sharing your insights on this critical, important topic.
Thank you so much. It was great discussing with you.
Thank you.